Virginians have always stood at the crossroads of the fight for freedom. It is a battle in which we all reap the benefits. World War II was the defining event of the 20th century. It involved 60 countries. Over 57 million people were killed. The nuclear age was launched, and the United States emerged as the world's most powerful nation. World War II was fought in two major theaters of operation: the North African, Mid-Eastern, and European theater, and to the Far East, the Asiatic Pacific theater. Over 20,000 Americans were captured and interned in Japanese prisoner of war camps during World War II. These camps were notorious for their brutality and had a death rate in excess of 35%.
I was picked up by 5th Columnists on Christmas Day, 41. And by 12 o'clock the next day, they had us all lined up, painting numbers on our back. And we worked as stevedores in Manila. And we worked there for 27 and a half months. We'd done nothing but everything we touched while we were there, we sabotaged. Everything we could possibly sabotage.
That's when our flag was pulled down and theirs was pulled up. And there was about 12,000 of us. And they put us out there and we stayed there for 3 weeks with one little old spigot that drizzled water. I lived off of the canteens from dead Americans and dead Japs.
So he came out and gave us the first Japanese speech. And he said, I want you people to know that you are prisoners of war of the Imperial Japanese Army, and you are far lower than the lowest Japanese private in the Imperial Army.
They put us in a camp. My mom and my sister in one camp. My father and I went into another camp. I was 12 years old, 12, 13 years old. I was a kid.
I don't know how many death charges they dropped. They were a mass of them, but they beat us all up, knocked out the lights. But as long as they were hitting on top, all the explosion went up just about it. So we got in, we was in the mud there, and about 10 o'clock that night they quit. I know they busted airlines on the outside, and they left us alone. And we started trying to get out of there. About 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, we finally broke loose from the mud. And we was on our last bank of high pressure air when we broke through. We was going to run across the Java Sea to the southern tip of Borneo and go down in shallow water and work on it and repair the ship the best we could and try to get out of there. Well, about 4 o'clock in the morning, here come a cruiser and 2 destroyers in on us. When they come in and started firing, the old man said, abandon ship. And we threw all the code books and all. They were sunk with lead and all that, sunk to the bottom, and started letting her go down. And we all got off of it and swam away from it. Well, when they got light enough, they could see that it was gone. One of the tin cans come up close, and so they took us aboard, took us up to the southern coast of Borneo, and offloaded us there and marched us out to a Dutch army camp out there.
And then Bataan fell on April 9th, and that's when they started the death march. And then they lined up their guns all along the Bataan Peninsula. It was about 100 batteries the Japs put up in, and they shelled us and they bombed us for 28 days until Skinny Wainwright wanted to run up the flag. On May the 6th, they overrun us in, and that's where I ended up on Cricketall.
We got off at Kappa Station, and they walked us, I think it's about 5 or 6 miles more up to Camp O'Donnell. And along the way there, the Filipino people tried to give us food. They were crying. They felt sorry, but it kind of brings tears to my eyes, doesn't it? But they were throwing food to us. Some of them got killed for doing it. I saw them bayoneted, killed for trying to throw a little ball of rice or something to a soldier.
Many of them Filipinos, later on trying to get food and medicine to the American GIs, were killed. Caught and killed for trying to help us. I had a young man that I'd put through some boot camp, just like I did Jack. He came over when Jack came over. Come to me, he says, Sergeant, he says, I can't eat this rice. And I told him, I says, Irwin, if you don't eat this rice, you see them guys they're carrying out up the hill, that's where you're gonna go. I says, eat anything you can find to eat. In a week, he was dead. Just a young kid.
Our officers had found out where some food was, and they'd gathered it all up. Finally said, well, each man can have 1 can. So they lined us up and let us all by that pile and pick up 1 can of food to take with us. I picked up the biggest can I could see. It was a gallon can. No label on it. I had no idea what I was getting. You never. It was a big surprise to me when I finally opened it later. It was a gallon can of prunes.
We marched for 5.5 days, and sometimes, there was a little creek in there, so you just scoop it up a little bit, and even if the water's dirty, I have a white T-shirt. So I put that on my mouth first and then sip some of the water, see? Who knows, where the water came from. And the Japanese sometimes, when you see somebody fall and they can't walk anymore, instead of shooting them, they just stick with a bayonet, see? It happens a lot of times. And that was terrible. I hate it. I'll never forget it, though.
We had a spirit that I just wouldn't let them break our spirit. But I wasn't about to let them get me. They no matter what they did, I got beat time and again. They'd beat you for anything in the world. If you fell down now, you got beat more. But I never fell down. The mosquitoes there was so bad that you had a quota of mosquitoes that you had to turn in every day. He told me, he says, Turk, I quit. I give up. I said, Willie, you can't. We gonna get out of here tomorrow. They'll be here. No. I said, they will be here tomorrow. He lay down in that bunk that night, and when I woke up the next morning, he was dead. When he was not sick, as far as really sick, he just did not have the will to live.
They weren't individual graves. I mean, those back in O'Donnell, we put 20 to 40 men in one shallow hole, We stripped them of everything, their clothes, anything else they had, so other people could use it. In the Philippines, they fed us rice, and it was full of rat droppings, weevils, little green worms, everything else. And I never took them out. I never took any of them out. I ate all those worms. The little weevils were kind of crunchy, but the little green worms, you couldn't even tell when you're eating them. But I thought, well, that's a little extra protein.
They beat the hell out of me. Eye cut open, welts on my head, nose was bleeding. They broke my nose, stripped me to the waist, tied my hands back of me, on my knees, facing the sun. Every hour and a half, 2 hours, more scotch, get up and turn into the sun. And when I got done, the sun set. Sergeant guard come over and says, okay, good prisoner, let me help you.
My dad ended up in the hospital 2 or 3 months, and he was released, and I passed him in the barracks, and I didn't even recognize him. He turned around and he said, Frank, and I looked up and I said, who the heck is that guy? It was my dad. He had lost 30 or 40 pounds. He was just a skeleton.
I saw him tie a guy to a coconut tree for stealing a can of corned beef. And he beat him. They beat him with a pick handle till he fell limp in the ropes. I didn't care about the Japanese rules. I was doing whatever was good for me to survive the situation.
And a lot of guys, they figure, well, the Americans are never going to come and get us, and so they just give up. And they just died. Because in Commando 1, we had a death rate of about 60, 65 a day. And never a man was buried with his clothes on. They were always buried naked because you had to have his clothes. They never give us any clothes. So. They brought in one of those hell ships and stacked us in the hold of it was a cat. The one we was on it used to be a cattle hauler or something. I don't know. They just packed you down in the hold, so one man could stand up, one man could sit down.
They took us down to the docks in Manila, loaded us in the hold of an old freighter, and we took off for Japan. We had a typhoon. Saved our lives, probably. We did have submarines in the area. I didn't know it, but I was later told that a torpedo did hit our ship, and somewhere up around Taiwan, but it was a dud.
We was gonna leave Taiwan. They had put us on a new ship, but we was tied up at Taipei, Formosa. There's a ship here and a ship up here, being loaded with prisoners of war. It's taking them off of Taiwan, taking them all to Japan. Well, our planes come over to bomb us and strafe us. And this ship up here, he got a direct hit on the forward hold of it, killed 600 men, 600 prisoners of war.
First year I was in Japan, 100 men died in our camp. When we got there, the camp commander said, "You're here to work or die." You had to want to live. You had to have the will to live. We did hard labor on what our American doctors told us when we got back was impossible to live on. Weighing about 100 pounds, I could carry 200 pounds of coal up those planks and dump them in. Wasn't easy, but I could do it. We got one bath a month. 600 men took a bath in the same tub, and then when we finished bathing, we used that water to wash our clothes in. I made 2 what I consider friends of Japanese. But for many years, I kept in contact with them. And they did very little, really, but they did something. The first one, I told him I had Berry that I was beginning to learn a little Japanese, and my feet hurt. And he didn't say anything. The next day I came back to work, and he came by and handed me a bottle of vitamin B pills, a full bottle, Japanese vitamin B pills. May have saved my life.
We ended up in Japan, and they lined us all up and marched us through the town. The Japs was throwing rocks at us and spitting on us, and we were down and blasting and picking and loading cars and getting the copper out. And we was there for working 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. And just 2 shifts. And we were working down about 2,400 feet. You could kind of figure that how the war was going by the treatment you got. It started off treatment, it wasn't real bad, but then as the Americans took over these islands, at each island that they took and the Japs they killed, and the treatment started getting worse. They started beating you more. We saw every day these, we were in camp out in the mines, these B-29s coming over. And they were firebombing Tokyo and Nagasaki and all those places, you know. And them people didn't have anything to eat either. We were really lucky to get what we got because they were starving to death themselves, the Japanese population. But they weren't ready to give up.
I worked in a Japanese copper mine for 16 months. Most of us did. The B-29s came over one night and they bombed the city out of existence. The next night, the Navy came up and shelled. He said to us, "Hey guys, I got some news for you. I don't want you to raise your voices. The Emperor of Japan has surrendered." We didn't yell or scream, we just cried.
So one day we came up out of the mines and we didn't have to go to work that day. And the next day they just told us there's no more work, no more work. And they hadn't told us that the war was over until they got us all out of the mines. And then they said that the United States and Japan had signed a peace treaty and we were going home.
And then one day a bunch of Japs came in and put POW on top of our barracks in big white letters. And we didn't even know what the hell that meant. But then when the B-29s come over, we didn't even know what they were. And we looked up there and he says, "God, look at that thing." Said, and we had some Air Corps guys with us. And it says, "No, that's not they're not Americans." But after everything got down, they started sending down American cigarettes and chewing gum. They were Americans.
We were lucky to survive from day to day because there was no end in sight. We didn't know where the war was, when it would end. East is east and west is west, and never the twain shall meet. And he was right, because to us, life is the most precious thing on earth. To them, it doesn't mean anything.
And I told him the greatest place in the world is America first. But it cost a great price to keep it free.